how to weather your Pip-Boy, or in fact any other pristine prop replica you own.
Hush!
Are you going to do that much more? Alright, are you done with it though? Yeah, okay, it's going to start. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. Right, so much for that. Sooner or later we'll get started. I'm Chris Barnardo and co-founder of the One Company, and we make this lovely product, the Pip-Boy kit, which hopefully you've also had a part in making. And I'm here with Alex Alva, who works at Chronicle Collectibles and does an absolute expert job of painting up for the paint masters. And what we're here to do is see how, and give you a tutorial about how we can take this built-up Pip-Boy that you've made, which is all pristine and new and looks great, and we can turn it into this rather fabulous weathered prop that looks like it's spent, well, perhaps at least a few years in the wasteland tied to somebody's arm, but certainly something that you can be proud of. The difference between these two things is weathering, and hopefully we'll just tell you a little bit about it, give you some tips, some secrets on how to do this yourself. And what weathering does is it adds a layer of reality, a layer of immersion to the product. There are the paint finish, which you can tell here, there's a nice pristine product. On top of that, you have dirt that's accumulated over years. You can see there where the dirt's got in the little cracks, the bloom on the screen, for example. And then you also have some damage that's occurred, maybe some paint has chipped off, and there you can see how that paint looks. And we're going to show you how to do all of that and how to turn this prop into this. So, Alex, it's quite a complicated process, but if you break it down, it's not that hard, is it?
No, not at all. I kind of want to make it fan-friendly. What I've come to find out is that a lot of cosplayers wear your products.
Yeah.
And just to say, hey, you're actually here in Texas. We usually Skype, and so
we do usually Skype. Yeah, so this is really cool to be with each other.
So to make it simple is what we're hopefully aiming for. But when I saw this piece, I think I told you earlier that it reminded me of when I used to paint Star Wars and Boba Fett and all the armor and the helmet, and there's a lot of chipping and weathering.
Yep. So
I've come up with simple techniques to try and recreate that in a subtle way, for the fan that actually owns this piece. So
okay, so now I'm assuming it's quite easy to get a bit heavy-handed with it and
yes,
to put paint all over it and stuff like that. And what would you advise in terms of how far to go?
What I would just say is that depending on what it is that you're using for, you just want it to show off the weathering. I would start, less is more.
Okay.
Light weathering to start with. You can always come back and add more. Take it off, because what we're going to use is a water-based acrylic.
Right.
Maybe some alcohol, some oil-based stuff that I can actually show you the brands and techniques that we're going to use for that. But for the most part, we have things like a brush, a sponge. Those of you that want to get even fancier can use an airbrush and shoot these washes out and then wipe them off the same way.
Okay.
But it's fairly simple. You can find these at craft stores.
Yeah, so we're going to, at the end, we'll put a list of all the things that you need to buy, but most of the stuff, Alex, why don't you show us the paints and stuff that we're going to use for it, because you'll be surprised that to get an effect like this, you actually need only just 3 or 4 different kinds of paint, and you can really get a seriously good effect.
So the first one I've chosen is the straight flat black.
Uh-huh.
I've noticed if you think about outdoor weathering, everything seems to be flat. So there's no semis, there's no glosses, things like that. So if it's a flat finish, Windex, actually I have a bottle of Windex right here, and I use that to reduce it. It's the best way to apply something that's not abrasive. It doesn't smell.
Right.
It's not going to...
It's not toxic.
Not toxic anymore.
I wouldn't drink it though, by the way, just to make sure you know that.
But just straight black, kind of in a washy form, you can see it's pretty liquidy. And then I took less black and made it what I like to call a transparent with more Windex.
So there's no white added to that, it's just more Windex?
It's just more Windex.
Wow, okay, looks really great.
Yeah, and then of course, with the screws and all the components that you have on there, you need some plastic rust on there as well. It's the same thing, it's a red-brown with an orange, and then just a Windex. It's
really interesting actually, if you look at that, it's probably much more orange than you'd think, but I guess iron oxide is a very orangey colour if you think about it.
I think to put it on layers is the key. You can put a first layer and just get a basic, and then you add another layer of orange on top of that. It gives you that bright rust feeling, just in a little spot and a little touch.
Well, I think we'll show you that in a minute, but it's clear that if you start gently and just put these things on a bit at a time, then you can build up the effect you want.
Correct.
I'd also recommend, from my own experience of painting things, is it might be best to do it in stages and step away from it. Go and have a cup of tea or a cup of coffee or a soda or maybe even a meal, and then come back and look at it with a different lighting.
Correct.
Because you can get really involved and do things, and before you know it, your eyes have kind of got used to it. And when you come back to it later, you think, oh my goodness, but I've done much too much. I should have backed off. So I think you need to do it in stages.
Well, I think the other piece is that what your Pip-Boy is made of. I think everyone can see that it is a hard plastic, and the color obviously is built into the plastic. So it's going to be a little forgiving. If for some reason you do get heavy-handed, I can show you how to remove it as well.
Okay. Now, one last colour, the most important one in some respects is the silver. Tell us about a little bit about
It's
this.
a bright silver, and I'm going to go straight to the actual brand because it's kind of one of my favorites. This is a chrome silver from Tamiya. It's an international paint as well, so you can get it overseas, you can get it in the US. We like to use it because it's alcohol based, but you can actually put Windex in it as well. It's classified as an acrylic as well.
Okay.
But the brightness and the chipping, and I'll show you how to apply that the right way with the brush and without. There's other techniques to make it actually look like real chipping. Okay,
so we're using acrylic paint, which is a sort of latex-based, water-based paint that dries so it's not water-soluble, and that's the key. And we're using Windex to thin it. It's an accelerator which will help it dry a bit quicker, and it's also a wetting agent which will help it go smoothly over the plastic. You probably know if you've ever tried painting watercolours onto a plastic sheet, they tend to blob up and they don't really go where you want them to. So the Windex is quite an important trick, and it's really these little tricks, these professional tricks, that will help you quickly get from your Pip-Boy to a weathered Pip-Boy that looks like it's been wandering around in the wasteland for a few years.
Yeah, and here's another example of kind of an overly done segment of the piece.
This is one where you tried, where you did a little sample for us, and you sort of went a bit heavy with it and said, let's go for it.
I just figured, this thing had been through some battles, and so I wanted to actually see what it could do and how dark it could get. But it really changes the color, and then you can actually get to a point where you're applying all the silver on top, and then weather the silver on top of that. So it's just depending on how you want to do it.
Of course, and the trick with the silver, which is obvious when you look at it, the shape of the silver and the way it fits on the corners is to show as if this thing was made from metal, maybe an aluminium alloy or something like that, and the paint had chipped off or worn on the sharp edges and the corners, revealing the metal underneath. And that's the key. These three layers are going to be created. The middle layer is there already, and you're going to create the layer on top, which is the dirt, and the layer underneath, which is the basic metal that the thing's made from.
Yep.
Okay, well, I guess we should really start, because I'm getting a bit, this is looking great, we don't know how to do it.
Yep.
So where do you begin with something like this? What's the first step?
Well, first thing is just assess the piece. In this case, because it's already the colors of the base coats, there's no pre-sanding to adhere stuff.
It's nice and smooth, isn't it?
That's part of the reason why I used the colors that I did. So I like to just go to sponge and just apply, because I can actually wipe this stuff off, and I'll take a napkin as well, and I would just dab until I see kind of a spottiness on it. I don't want it to be too harsh. Okay, we'll show everyone what you're doing. So basically, loading up the sponge and then taking some of the ink out of it. Yeah. I'll just kind of see where it's at with things, and then when I actually put it on.
Let's turn this around so we can see.
You can see I can put it on, and then I'll just come with the Windex and spray it, and it kind of does what it's supposed to on its own. You can see it beating up. It looks kind of not right just yet, but I'll just come back and wipe some of that off with a paper towel or something like that.
It's looking great already.
And so once it dries, you have a first layer on there. Now I'm a little more technical because typically I use an airbrush on some of this stuff, but again, this is to actually help the basic fan with something that they might have at home if they don't have an airbrush. So I can actually take a brush as well, do the same thing, kind of dry brush effect, which means just take all the excess paint off and get in those creases.
Get into the cracks.
Yeah.
Of course, the thing with dirt is that it actually gets into the cracks, and as you wear something, the dirt forms in the cracks, and then the general wear and tear of your sleeve going on it, or in real life how it would work, would actually rub some of that material off, and that dirt off, leaving the dirt only in the cracks. And it's the dirt in the cracks that helps give the relief to the shapes. It helps pick out the details, and it actually makes it look like real dirt. Like, so putting it there with a brush.
This is very rough and very, I like to call it brushy, because it has brush strokes. So I'll take the Windex or I'll take the alcohol wash, and I would just spray it. and let the bits of spray, not actually dousing it, but just letting the actual balls of liquid let it do its thing. You can see kind of it's breaking up a little
Starting
bit.
to eat into it, yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, I can see. And that, I'm guessing, what is it replicating in real life? I suppose there would be dirt on something, and maybe it's been caught out in the rain, and there's little
grime.
Generally, that's
Yeah, maybe there was an explosion that was close
Yeah.
by, and the smoke hit, you know, the Pip-Boy or something like that, and so you start getting this kind of effect. And again, if for some reason I completely hate it, because it's acrylic base, I would just spray some more Windex, and I'll wipe it off if I don't like it, and it comes right off. And if for some reason it's too much, or I just want to come back on it where the grime is just in there, you kind of have that look as well. So I'll go at it a few times and see, okay, well...
You can't smell, but I can actually smell that Windex. I haven't had a great sense of smell, but you can smell it out on it.
What I want to see on it, you know, how far do I want to go? And that's kind of where I would start. This is kind of where I would start in terms of the amount of black that I would put on there, because you can really get heavy-handed, as you said, and you can always put more on as well.
Of course.
And so that's one technique, is the wipe-off technique, I would like to say. But you know, even when you get to the other parts as well, let's just try some of the rust and some of the screws as well.
Oh, right, so let's hold this up to the camera. You can see here straight away that that's quite aggressive. You've got that orange paint that you put on. The secret there is that this is already quite thinned down. It's quite nice and thin. It's not straightforward acrylic.
And before it dries, I typically just come back with a sponge and just kind of take it off.
It's looking great.
And if I typically don't like to wait for paint to dry, so if you can hand me the hair dryer that's sitting right there.
Oh yeah, there we go.
I'm very impatient, so I will just come at it. And with the rust, it's really just the first layer, so I would kind of leave it there, and then as I see more, as Chris said, you know, you walk away from it, kind of look at it, assess it, see if it's too much, too little.
I mean, that would need some dirt around it. It's not just the rust; it's all the dirt and the cracks. By the way, if you're using someone else's hairdryer, do get their permission to use it, because that hairdryer, I don't know if my wife, obviously I don't need a hairdryer, as you can tell, but if I sometimes could warm my head up, but if my wife saw me doing that to her hairdryer, she'd go bonkers. So yeah, I'd ask permission first.
Yeah, I think it was an ex-girlfriend's hairdryer as well.
Was it? Not an X, I think is the word there.
Yeah, keyword X.
Yeah.
And if for some reason I don't like it, again with this acrylic wash, because I like the way it actually sits in the cracks, I literally just cleaned everything and it stayed actually in the crevices.
Yeah, and that is really quite a key thing to weathering. Is increasing the sort of relief that you see by adding that detail.
Correct. I think that's if you just think about weathering in terms of real world weathering, most of the grime, most of the stuff gets into the actual cracks, gets around the metal, gets around into the crevices, and so if you can do that and then scale back on it and wipe it off, I think that's you're going to be happy with the result. For sure.
Okay. Well, we're going to do a little bit more, and then what I think I'm going to do right at the end of this video is we're going to show this pre-weathered one that we've already spent a lot of time doing carefully, and we're going to show some orthographic views of it, like a top view, a front view, a side view and stuff, which will be a really good pattern for you to copy if you want to get the exact chips and the exact feeling like this, or you want to use this as a basis for what you're doing.
What I did as well, just so people know, is I pulled all the reference from the actual the teasers when they had the actual Pip-Boy nice and close up.
Okay.
Some people want to replicate that specifically. You know, that's what I would recommend. It's just a lot of good reference.
Yeah. So, and that's one thing that we do when we're building our replicas. Is it's very easy to start down a path that you're making up yourself, but really you should go back to the original reference if you want to and see what they did there. If you depart from it, that's fine, but at least you'll know you're departing from it.
Yep.
So what are we going to do? What else? We're going to finish off this top bit here and see.
We could do a couple more layers on this.
I think we should, yeah, and then with a bit of Windex and we'll see what that looks like.
Yeah. Okay.
I really like the sound of that.
Yep.
I noticed on the one that you weathered up. Sorry, whilst you're doing that, I'm just saying the one that you weathered up before, that you actually did something with this as well, and of course. Things like this, where you can see the numbers here, they are replicating something that in the design was a kind of they were like rolling discs, the way that they sort of turn around, an
Right.
odometer type sort of style. Although, ironically, you just wouldn't be able to fit the correct size disc in that space. So it's only like a computer game where they've just made it up. But let's just say that that's rounded, and to get that effect, you could paint a bit of dirt into the corners there to highlight the fact that these are rounded. Anyway, we're going to now. You're gonna get the airbrush out.
I'm going to use the airbrush because it'll go a lot faster than me trying to rub it on. But
You've got an airbrush and you've got a tank for air, and you've got air there, compressed air coming down from upstairs.
Yeah.
But you can actually buy airbrushes. You can buy cans of air, and you can have quite a cheap airbrush. In fact, you can even, I think, you can get felt pens. You can get a felt tip pen with an air attachment to it.
Yep.
That you can then spray on using a can of air.
I think most cosplayers nowadays are actually in that realm where they are actually taking the next step
Right.
and authenticating and making their costumes extremely accurate by doing the same techniques, including using an airbrush as well.
When I was a kid and I wanted stuff to look really realistic, I didn't even know about airbrushes, and it was a real shock to me when I went to my first art studio and saw people using airbrushes. So you might be scared if you've never used one before, but it's definitely something that I think you'll get a lot of fun out of, and certainly will really make your models look great.
It's the same thing. There's things that you can create just with sponges and brushes that are good technique, and then there's some things that you just can only create with an airbrush. So it depends on what your skill level is and where you want to go. But for the application piece for this, I think just real quick, just to kind of speed it up.
So if we're going to do this in a second with the airbrushing, but if you well, let's do that first. Now I'll ask you some questions about other potential. We'll just move that out of the way. It looks like it's about to fall right off the table.
Yeah. So same wash. It's already thin enough for airbrush, which is the reason why I thinned it out as well.
And what is that thing? It's about 50-50. Is it paint and Windex?
I would say it's more like a 3/4 mix. 75-25.
Which bit's
Windex.
75 and which bit's 25?
Paint 75, 25 Windex.
Excellent. Okay, so a quarter Windex. Okay.
So this is just again flat black, and you get a smoother result, I think. And then when you add that Windex on there, or your alcohol, depending on what you're wanting to use.
But I just must point out, look how little was done, and look at the effect already. And that is why you've got to be so careful not to go over the top. You can see straight away that very quickly you can see the dirt there. You're about to take it off, aren't you?
So what I'm going to do is create the effect. So this is very smooth, very smoky, very airbrushy is what we like to call it, airbrushy. Right? So I'm just going to take this small sprayer and just do that one time.
Oh, look at that.
And then it just breaks it up as it dries.
Now this is really the professional secret, because it's one of those things actually you can see straight away incredibly how that look has gone away from being something that is actually quite mechanical looking to something that's very organic looking. And the reason it's organic looking is because the way you've added the detail is a very chaotic organic way of spraying on. It is good to have, again, you can get these online, and you could just use Windex straight in the normal dispenser that it comes, but really you want a mister. And they're the sort of things that people they use there for cactuses or for plants and things like that.
I wouldn't spray using this. This is for big one-on-one pieces. This is probably more where you get the fine little pebbles of mist.
Yeah, and that's something that's basically a gardening type thing. We've got a nice pink one here, but you can probably get different colours.
And so the same thing with this. I'll take the alcohol wash over the Windex. I'll spray it on my napkin. This is maybe, to me, a little bit too organic, so I'll touch it up with a paper towel and just kind of lightly take some of it off. And again, if I think I took off too much, or I think there's too much on there, or I want to add more back, I'll just spray it again and hit it again. And it dries out.
Well, this is actually it's a lovely sort of thing to learn, that it's such an iterative process, because you can go over the things again a couple of times and actually have real fun just layering it on, taking it off, layering it on, and of course all the layers you put on, all the detail you put on, every single mark, every little bit of dirt will tell a story, because what you're doing is you're creating that depth of experience, you're creating an effect of a product that's been around for maybe 10 or 12 years, and you're adding to that history by putting those things on. So the layers you put on and the layers you take off, they're each going to tell a story.
Correct. And then from here, it depends. I've added some browns in there as well, but I'm going to go ahead and shoot with the rust as well. I think that would probably be better.
If you look here, you can see where the rust has already been put on and wiped off, where it's starting to dry here. It's beginning to look really like rust. I think if you've ever seen a nail in a white wall, you'll see that kind of orangey rust dribbling down the wall, and that's that very same colour.
Well, what I should do first is kind of go with the silver a little bit.
Okay.
And the reason I'm going to go with the silver is because with the silver, you can actually do this effect as well, which is put the silver on and come back and weather on top of the silver, rather than just do what I did here, where it's just a chip and it's very clean. It's very
in a way, this is another part of the history. Is if you see here, for example, this corner where the paint has chipped off, it may have chipped off just in the last few days, and it's been kept clean, and that's why it looks so shiny. I guess if it had been chipped off 10 years ago, the chips would already have dirt in them as well, which is what you're saying there.
So I'm going to use a sponge, because the sponge has these pores. You would think that we more control maybe a brush, but in this case, the sponge actually allows me to have an organic feel, and I just hit it one time, and you get this.
That's very, very cool.
You get an actual organic chip, I would say.
Yeah.
And then of course you just kind of, where would it bump? Where would it hit? You know, where would
it catch?
Where would
the
it catch?
corners,
It would be the corners. Always the
corners,
corners, right? And that just seems like it would be common. And if it looks too faded, then I'll just come back and hit it. I'm doing a little much here, just so you can see it on the camera, I would think, as opposed to what we did there. And if I don't like the way it's going with the sponge, or I want more specific scratches, then I'll take the brush with the same silver and just kind of fade it out.
Oh yeah, of course.
But need more on my brush, of course.
Yeah.
Just kind of do that, and it picks it up.
Oh my goodness, it's amazing.
The edge does it for you.
The edge does.
And again, this is a lot, I would say.
Yeah, I would. It's looking seriously cool, but I would suggest that this at this stage, when you're putting on the silver, you really show restraint, and you really take it easy, because it's very.
Yeah, this is where I would say
very easy to get carried away and think, oh my, we need that all over the place. But
yeah.
I think the less is more.
Correct. Or where the reference comes in, and you would say have one exactly like what I'm looking at in terms of the reference. That's what people need to focus on.
I love the sponge trick. That's a very, very neat little trick.
And then I'll come back with rust as well. And this is a wash, so if you can see here, it's a transparent. So what I mean by that is that since I have black here, you can see the black still.
Of course. So that's probably more like half and half, would you say?
Correct, yeah.
So that's, half paint and half Windex.
Yeah, and did I put any rust on this top piece, or is it just...
I think you put it, that's what I can see is a little bit of orange there.
Yeah.
You can see here, if you look, that it goes black, but there's a little bit of orange kind of in these little parts here.
So it's more like a finishing, just to give it some contrast, that there's more than just black wear out there.
Just turn like that.
And because it's a wash, that black will still come through.
Yes, it's great. Well, the other thing there is, of course, that putting on different colours, another layer may show a little bit more of the history. This not only got dirty, but it got dirty at a particular time, and then it got dirty at another time because there's different colours on it. So that in itself is very exciting. That's looking great.
Well,
make sure you clean your airbrush out after you've used it each time, because acrylic does dry and it is very hard to get it out.
I think
tiny little bits.
One of the best pieces that I actually enjoyed weathering was all of this right here.
Right.
To me, this was probably my favorite part, because it has an element of glass, metal, and then the vents. You know, the vents would be chipping.
Yeah.
You would think these would get used more because these are the buttons you press and stuff like that, so there's more wear. And with that, I actually took smaller brushes and did it this way, where I would actually just, it's a thin brush, and I would just go into the cracks. And it goes on pretty heavy, but again, you know, once you put that Windex on, or the alcohol wash, alcohol 91%, 70% works in terms of.
So it's like rubbing alcohol, isn't it?
Correct. Yeah.
You just get it from the chemist.
Yep.
Okay, pharmacist, and
so it does that. But again, I love my airbrush, so even what we call wet on wet, where I've already sprayed it with the Windex or the alcohol.
Before it dries, yeah.
Correct. You can have to spray on top of that, and it just does what it's supposed to, typically, but you're drying it out as well. And again, like you said, less is definitely more. If I don't like it, I can just take it off. There's no real, like, universal way to weather each one the same, I think.
I think that's part of the beauty of it too, because the history of the product, the history of your own Pip-Boy in the world that the fantasy world that you've walked around, it would collect its own knocks and chips. They wouldn't all be identical anyway.
Correct. So just let that
I
sit.
love that technique.
And I typically love to use the alcohol Windex wash because of the fact that it dries fast and I can move on to the next layer. Yep. So the rust there as well, while it's wet, because it just does a certain thing, I'll take the same thing with the actual rust color, wash, and I'll put it on the screws, and then it'll dry by itself. It'll dry flat if you have a flat acrylic base. And again, I'll give these specific paints to Chris, so you can know exactly what it is that we're using. Most of these colors are internationally based colors. You can just order them online directly to the manufacturer.
Yeah, and being acrylics, of course, they're not going to be dangerous. They're not going to have any restrictions for shipping them.
Yep.
And they're not smelly. There's no volatiles inside them either. So you'll be able to do them indoors, and no one will worry that you're smelling the house out with some horrible solvent.
Yep. And so, you want to go ahead and do the whole thing?
Well, I'd like to do the screen, because one of the things that I loved about this weathering was the way that we've weathered the glazed areas, the glass here, and the screen specifically. Now, that's another thing that happens. Dirt accumulates, but also you get a kind of a bloom across things. I'm not entirely sure what that is in real life, but I know it's there, and if you look at some old windows and things, they seem to have this bloom around the corners, around the edges, where maybe the middle's been cleaned off a bit and the end's not dusty. So I think that really needs to be done with the airbrush.
I just like to spray it on my hand to see it, but you can tell it's more of a chalky white, and it dries very flat as well.
Okay.
And so I'll just spray it around the edge. And again, less is more, and I'll let that sit. So this is a Mig Jimenez oil-based wash. It's already
made up?
Yeah, it's basically thinned out for you to be applied as a wash. I see a lot of guys use it on model tanks for watermarks, things like that, and you can actually brush it, line it on, and it fades perfectly. And I'll take my napkin as well that has alcohol or Windex, and I'll just wipe, obviously keeping the center of the screen pretty clean. And again, I think we're kind of doing a bit much for this video, but
it looks quite extreme.
Yeah.
I mean, later on we're going to much later on in the life of this product, we're going to be talking about making some upgrades. Maybe you want to put a screen in there, or you could put an overhead projector slide with an LED behind to light up. But we're going to actually be working on some things like that to bring this Pip-Boy alive with some functionality. And obviously you wouldn't want to cover up the screen completely, because you want to see that coming through. But
you want to spray in the face?
No, great.
And so for these types of techniques, again, less is more, and you just want to do it, look at it, take more off, put more on.
But in a way, you can't actually really go wrong,
yep.
because this thing could have been at the bottom of a pond, a lake, or you could have dug it out of the ground where it got blown to one side. And in fact in the trailer you see that there's a power armor just in the ground, and the earth, and of course dirt is a whole range of things. And we're using paints here, but you can use other things. You can, as we said earlier, you can use mascara, but you can use shoe polish. You can basically think to yourself, what could I use to dirty it up a bit? What we're trying to show you here is a controlled process where you can put stuff on and take it off again, and that way you can get a really professional look to it.
Yep. And so I think
completely gone over the top with that screen.
Yeah, I think we're at a point where you can definitely see the fog on that.
Yeah.
And again, because it's an
I really like it actually. I really do. It's like
it's an oil-based product. Again, you can just wipe it off if you don't like it.
Yeah.
Just wipe it right off. Redo it. Which I do want to show because again, this is not rocket science. It's just.
And I like even the way it's in the cracks. You can't
Yep.
quite. I mean, I'm saying that if you had this if this was real and you were using it as a piece of equipment and you got caught out in the rain or you got some dirt on it or something blasted and it went on it, you would then attempt to wipe it off, and that's the effect that you get.
Correct.
Are there clearly some people might be doing this and think, oh, I'll use nail varnish remover and stuff like that. This material is an engineering plastic called ABS, and that is a rubber modified styrene. And if you start using things like nail polish remover or acetone, you really will start to melt the plastic and it will destroy it. So what we're saying here is that alcohol is a different type of solvent to acetone and carbon tetrachloride, which will just melt this plastic. You want to follow what we're saying and use Windex or rubbing alcohol. That really is important. Otherwise, you will destroy the screen and it will melt. And,
Yep.
and
so we've taken most of it off.
it looks great, actually. Yeah.
And then I'll just come back, and it's obviously now it's in the crevices.
Yeah.
And then I'll just do a light touch around, kind of holding my airbrush back a little bit, so I'm not getting too crazy again.
Nice.
And I have people in the industry use this technique and just kind of do this, but it really does add something to it that's organic.
It really does. And it's one of those things that you really notice straight away, and it has. You can start to see here where we're starting to do it properly. You would expect that this area here would have dirt around it in the cracks, and the screen would be dirty. And you can imagine wiping that with your finger and wiping it off with the sponge and the tissue. You can see here that this is what's great about this model is it's so detailed, and what you need for weathering is you need lots of surface detail, to pick up the dirt and to pick up the paint.
I think one of the things you wanted to see was.
Yeah, we could have a look at that. Yeah.
Okay.
Because in the design, obviously, as I was saying earlier, this is a special kind of display which they used to have in cars in the old days, where the cylinders rolled round and they had numbers on them in the cylinders. And it's sort of a mechanical display for displaying different numbers. Now, in the model that we've made, that part is flat. And we tinted the sticker to make it look like it was slightly got a shadow to it. But you can enhance that by putting a bit of dark in the corners and then leaving the middle bit lighter. And that really will make it look round, and it'll make it look like the dirt has gone into that odometer mechanism, which is what you want.
So I'm just going to load the black again. Again, it's a thinned out black. And I have it on a very, very low setting as well, which is what I would do with the brush as well. I would just very lightly. And if you feel that your Windex is too light, you can do levels of Windex. And so I would just come in mainly around the actual key points and not getting on the actual numbers itself.
I see. Yeah, I can see already that's looking good. Now, I noticed one of the things which is quite cool is the buttons have a little dip in the middle, and obviously in real life that dip in the middle would certainly get filled with dirt. So putting some dirt on top of the buttons and then rubbing it off flat so that you've got this ring round the outside with a little bit of dirt in the middle will look very realistic. Now we're doing it in a studio, and as you can see we're surrounded by paints, and so we've got paper down here and stuff. I guess if you're doing this at home and you're doing it on the kitchen table or you're doing it on your best tablecloth, you're going to get mess everywhere. You're going to get spray, what they call overspray actually. You're going to get overspray on things, paint's going to spill. Do not, I'm sitting here in my nice shirt, do not do this in your best clothes, and don't do it on your best...
This isn't your paint clothes?
This isn't, well yeah, I should have come in my paint clothes, shouldn't I? But don't do it on your best table, because you'll mark it and you don't really want to weather that.
So what I've done is just done the same thing and what I've done before. It's just come back, spray it with the Windex, spray it with the alcohol, whichever version you're using, and it breaks it up.
Yeah.
Same thing with, I did some work in here.
Yeah. I think this is the
breaks it up.
The trick of that watery look, giving that really organic finish to it, is amazing.
Yeah,
Well,
and then you just keep going with it. Again, go have some lunch, go have a tea, come back.
I definitely think that going away and coming back is an important thing, because we can get carried away here and we come back and think, hang on a minute, we've just gone a bit mad. But okay, I think we're pretty much there. Is there anything else you think that we should know that a professional would do that would actually be the last final thing to finish it off?
The only thing that I would recommend is that, if it's true chipping and it's happening recent, then your chipping does need to be cleaned if you want to go that route. The sponge is probably the best way to go.
Wow.
I think that's the best thing, because it's very organic looking. It doesn't.
I think it's amazing, actually. Yeah, and like all of these things, you have to try and look at it with fresh eyes, because you've seen how it's created. You've kind of, you've lifted up the little sort of sheet. You've looked at the magic being created. But everyone else who looks at it, people who look at it from scratch, won't do that. And things in life are so much perception of how we see them. You will see that. You will imagine yourself using the sponge to make that thing. You will see it like that. But everyone else looking at it who hasn't seen you do that will see what looks like metal underneath paint. So I think that's the key to remember, is that when you do these things, you'll become normalised to it, but other people won't. And that's what you're creating, is something fantastic for other people to look at and for you to be proud of.
And I think the last thing that we can probably go over is the straps.
Yeah, because on this one here, you can see
well.
this got all dirtied up, and you can see very nicely that strap's got what looks like, to be fair, it looks like the sort of strap you might find on the subway. It looks like it's really had some serious dirt. And of course, the thing with fabrics and leather and straps is actually they do get dirty, and it's very hard to get the dirt off them, especially if they've got road dirt on them, unless you put that in the washing machine. So that's a great thing to actually weather.
Yeah, what I like to do is I like to do a wet on wet technique, which is if you don't have an airbrush, and just take the fabric and you're just going to wet it, and you're going to take your black or whatever, and you just you paint it on, and because you've wet it, it kind of spreads itself.
Of course, yeah. What a great idea.
And you can just in the cracks.
Let's hold that up at the camera, because you can see here, with it being wet, the paint just sort of wicks out into the fabric and gives you that lovely effect. That's
and
really
then
cool.
when it dries very worn.
Authentic.
Well. Correct.
Authentic.
Yep. And same thing with the actual leather pieces.
And you could do that with this fabric here. In fact, here we go. Here's a cuff.
So I did a combination of both. I used the airbrush on that,
I can
and
see
then I
here
went
where you've
and
done
actually
the
wet it.
Yeah.
I wet it first with Windex, of course, and I just came back in and did the same technique where I actually took the black and just went in the cracks with it.
But it just
spreads on its own.
Just spread out.
Mm-hmm.
See. God, can you imagine? You've just spent all that money buying this kit. You've just assembled it. It's taken you 3 or 4 hours to assemble it. I believe that some people have done it in less time. I think my record is about 2 hours, or perhaps a bit less. Really? Yeah. You might need to use some power tools, but anyway. And then you're now attacking it with paint, Windex, rubbing alcohol. Basically, you're taking your life in your hands, but you are aiming to create something really gorgeous that has layers of finish on it, and is exciting to look at. And you've actually had quite a big hand in making it what it is. You've built it to start with, and then you've finished it off in the most gorgeous way to make it look like the real prop. So I think that's about it, really.
I think that's it.
I'd love to see if you post any videos of what you've done, or any pictures, or questions, absolutely. And just after this, we're going to put some pictures of the various. We're going to write down what the things are, and then you'll be able to see to get them online. Thank you very much, Steve. Thanks for watching.
Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much, Alex. Why not cut the bottoms off some disposable drinks cups with some scissors and use them to mix your paints up in? I recommend the real paints, the professional paints, but frankly, any acrylic paint will do. Here are some pictures of the Pip-Boy that we weathered, showing you where the chips are and where we put the dirt to make it look really old and battered. You're going to have great fun doing this, and it's actually not as hard as it looks. The result is excellent. So good luck, and I look forward to seeing the pictures of your weathered Pip-Boys. Thank you.